The large freighter weighing over 220,000 tons was finally freed in the Suez Canal. It was stuck there for more than a week. To discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, freeing that ship called the Evergreen from the canal allowed hundreds of other ships to finally get moving with their cargo as well.
Talk about a traffic jam. This is a crazy story, and perhaps more than the economic side effects of this $9 billion a day, and beyond the logistics of this. How are we in the year 2021 and we can't figure out how to get a stuck ship out of the canal? It was the bottom line of understanding how commerce works in this day and age, and how important the Suez Canal is in bringing the East and West together. I mean, this is a tremendous canal. There's so many different routes that rely on this canal, and again, that number is just so astounding, $9 billion a day, and they couldn't figure this out for almost a week. So we're glad that it's out, and I think they're going to be looking at not letting this happen again in the near future.
Yeah, 11 tugboats later, all the engineers. Incredible that they finally got it released. That was one big ship. Lisa, it appears as though the Iranian regime has infiltrated big tech platforms, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, in an effort to silence critics of the regime and to boost Iranian propaganda. Now, don't these companies have security and monitor for that kind of infiltration?
But do they want to root out this kind of infiltration, or are they okay with it? Or do they just stop people like Donald Trump and other conservatives who they don't agree with, and then allow Javad Zarif and Rouhani and Khamenei, the leaders of the Iranian regime, who spew hatred, who spew terrorist propaganda, to have platforms, to have, obviously their own Twitter accounts, and to use those Twitter accounts to say very anti-American things? They're allowed to have them. Not just that, but their own people, talk about being hypocrites, their own people can't go on these platforms to freely speak their minds and to post what they'd like. So, this is something that the Iranian regime is masterful at doing, at silencing the opposition, silencing the critics, and yet having their own platform, having this handbook of social media tricks on how to get their propaganda out. And that's exactly what they have done. They've infiltrated big tech to get their own messages out while silencing the opposition.
Iran and China have signed a 25-year cooperation agreement, Lisa, between the two allies. The signing of the agreement will include Chinese investments in key sectors such as energy and infrastructure. So what does that mean for us here in the West?
My gosh, Hal, this is the biggest news story in a long time, and no one's really covering it and understanding the extent at which why this is so important and why this will change the course of East-West relations for a long time to come. And I'll break it down for you. This is not Chinese investments in Iran. This is Chinese influence, not just in Iran, not just for the Iranian people, 80 million people who will be affected by this. This is giving them access to grow the Chinese empire into the Middle East, to give them the infrastructures, to give them access to information, to give them access to people, to trade. Everything will be, they basically bought Iran, a nation of 80 million people. And then, it really corners the West, the P5, the P5+1, or I should say the United States, from getting back into an Iran nuclear deal. The Iran regime now has an upper hand because they come to the table knowing that they've been backed up by the Chinese. They say the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that's exactly what the Chinese and the Iranians did. They got together, both being sanctioned by the US, both having, issues right now, trying to figure things out with the United States, with Biden, a new president in the United States. But this does not look good. This does not give the West an upper hand in dealing with our biggest two threats, which are the Iranian regime and the Chinese government. This is a very important story. The fact that this deal happened is extremely problematic, and it's going to mean for the United States to get back to thinking about what they're going to do with Chinese policy and Iran policy.
It's amazing too. I mean, you hear about agreements 5, 10, 15 years, but 25-year cooperation agreement between Iran and China. Now, speaking of China, Lisa, what's the latest since the two trials of the Canadians, Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig, who were each charged with spying? Do we know what happened since the trial? Were they found guilty? Any sentence carried out?
Nothing has been announced. I know people in Canada and all over. The United States just issued a statement saying that this is very problematic and that we are holding the government of China responsible to give us some transparency regarding this case. For those who have been following it, these two have been apprehended for 2 years without any sentencing, without any explanation. Obviously, we understand that it's a tit for tat for the arrest of the Huawei chief in Vancouver that occurred around that time. Uh, but what we do know is that the closed door trials are now over. They were over probably approximately a week ago or so. But the Chinese have said that they will release the statements at the time of their choosing. They will give out any information and that's exactly what the Chinese do at the time of their choosing. Meaning we won't know anything, and their future is their destiny really hangs in the balance. We will hear when we hear, and it's really unfortunate, but we are thankfully getting a lot of international cooperation on this. It's bringing the U.S. and Canada closer to at least discuss one common enemy right now, and that is the Chinese government, which is not giving any transparency to anyone on any topic.
Yeah, just praying with all my heart that the two Michaels will be released and are headed home soon. Lisa, still in Asia, there are reports that North Korea has been testing a new guided missile. How concerned should we be here in North America?
My goodness, Hal, it's like everywhere. It's like when the babysitter kind of leaves the room and you're like everything's going crazy. Everywhere you look, there is some sort of chaos. And our enemies, so to speak, and I don't want to call them enemies, but these are the rogue dictators of the world that were looking forward to a Biden presidency, that were looking forward to a changing of the guard that would bring in a guard that is much more lax. And North Korea is no exception. They're flexing their muscles. They have tested missiles. They have criticized the United Nations for criticizing them, and the list goes on. And it's not just North Korea. We're looking obviously again at China, at Iran, at the terror organizations. We're looking at the migrants that are marching our southern border. So, I think it's very telling of what those who were maybe a bit more apprehensive or fearful of a Trump foreign policy are now looking to President Biden as an easier time to get away with things, and North Korea is one of them.
Now, speaking of U.S. President Joe Biden, Lisa, the Biden administration projects the number of unaccompanied kids crossing the border could go from 16,000 this month to more than 26,000 by September. That's according to a recent document leak. Now, explain the significance of this.
Okay, this is horrific. First of all, those numbers might be much higher and astronomically so, only because we don't have any transparency about what's going on at the border. We have no transparency. Reporters are not allowed to visit these facilities. We know that they're not being COVID safe. We know that there is no way to vet these individuals, and again, they're bringing their children. They're bringing in perhaps unvetted individuals, those who are sick, those who are on the march for running from the law from wherever they're coming from. But the issue is, even at best, even if they are benign, lovely individuals, this is a very difficult situation. We have a very hard time absorbing these individuals. We're having a homelessness crisis here in the United States. We're not able to absorb our own, let alone let in these individuals. And it goes back to that reality versus ideology. The ideology being we want to let these people in. That's our intent. The intent is lovely. But how about the practice of it? Can we absorb the numbers? Can we bring in these individuals? Can we vet them properly? Can we ensure that we're not going to have a super spreader event by packing these individuals? I read somewhere that a room that was supposed to fit about 60 capacity is now fitting 700 people, for example. So this can't be safe. This can't be good at a time where we're told to wear double masks. And Joe Biden doubled down on that statement where you have to wear your masks. You have to wear your masks. Well, how about this crisis? And why are we being hypocritical? If we're trying to keep people safe here in this country, then we should keep them safe at the border as well.
Lisa, Fox News is reporting that the group Antifa armed rioters who descended and created havoc on the Oregon State Capitol. It's no wonder, I mean, the protests went as long as they did and continue.
Yeah, yeah, it's unbelievable. It circles back around. Obviously, this has nothing to do with the George Floyd case, but it does circle back around to his trial beginning now, and they're continuing to protest. This is just being in perpetual victimhood, perpetual protest mode. Antifa has lost its mind. I mean, it always had lost its mind, but right now it's just wanting to fight back against the system, and that's all that they know. Particularly in Oregon, we have friends of ours who live there and have a medical practice, and they have said there has not been one day where you don't see this kind of protesting happening on the street corners where our office is located. So it hasn't stopped. We're hearing about it in the news here and there. We hear trickles of reports, but the truth is, we have to get these hoodlums off the street. We have to get this ideology off of our streets and out of the minds of young people, that the government is not bad, that the United States is not bad, that our history is not bad. But we can learn from a lot of our mistakes. No country is perfect, but we go forward and we try to do better.
Now, nearly a year after George Floyd died, Lisa, the people of Minneapolis are still demanding justice, and the city is once again in the spotlight. Opening arguments have begun on the former police officer who was seen kneeling on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes during that fateful day in May of last year.
Yes. A lot of businesses here are bracing for more protests. We don't know what will happen when the verdict is announced. We don't know what the verdict will be, but we do know that they had a very difficult time choosing their jury because of the multi-million-dollar settlement that was given to George Floyd's family. Obviously, that tips the balance a bit. But we'll have to wait and see. Again, nobody wanted this gentleman to die. Nobody wanted this violence to be carried out in the aftermath of all of this. But I think it was taken to a place where it shouldn't have been taken, and it was connected to social issues that it had nothing to do with. And we're here again having this conversation about racism and about all kinds of isms that probably do exist, but not to the extent at which people are saying they do. I think the people of this country and around the world are better than what is being portrayed out on the streets, or what we're being accused of here in the United States and elsewhere. But I hope for better days. I hope that this trial will put this story to an end, and the family can find peace, and the business owners whose lives were destroyed can find peace and move forward and rebuild. And we can look back on this and say we're going to move forward from it. We're not going to go back to that dark place.
Meanwhile, in Nashville, Tennessee, the mayor there has declared a state of emergency due to flooding in the area. Tell me more about that.
Yes, we're having a few different natural disasters here in the United States, tornadoes and flooding. And in Tennessee, there is a state of emergency. I know a lot of major area establishments were shut down because of the flooding and the rains, and we wish them the best. We're thinking of you.
Lisa, here's kind of a cool story. Following the Abraham Accords, the deal to normalize relations between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, the Israeli government is preparing for the arrival of Muslim tourists. That's historic.
Absolutely historic, and it's not just the one way. It's multilateral. You'll see Israeli tourists in Arab countries, and you'll see all kinds of people traveling throughout the Middle East. And this is just the beginning. This is the future of the Middle East, where people can enjoy each other's cultures in peace and put the past and their history behind them, and they can look forward to years and years of collaboration, of tourism, of sharing technology, of sharing medical technology, and I really am excited for this. I mean, I used to travel to the Middle East all the time for work. I haven't been there in a long time because of COVID, but hopefully next time I go, I'll be able to visit multiple countries and not have to get a clean passport. If you go to Israel and go to their neighboring Arab nations, it used to be problematic, and now it won't be. And I look forward to a time to hear the stories of weddings going. I should say Jewish weddings happening in Dubai and vice versa. And this is really the cultural exchange that the future will be made of, particularly in the Middle East.
Well, and think about the amount of money that's going to be brought to the Israeli economy as well at the same time, opening up the floodgates to allow a lot more tourists into the region.
Absolutely, and it goes both ways. I think the Abraham Accords are going to be proven to be one of the most historic and beneficial accords that were ever to be signed between peoples, particularly of the Middle East. This has been since biblical times. We've talked about the Arabs versus the Israelis, and now we can say that they were brought together because of shared interests, and that is the economy and prosperity and a future that they can both share together.
There's one country I've always wanted to visit was Morocco. Ever since I watched some of those classic James Bond movies, Morocco, I'm like, that looks like a spectacular country. Have you been?
I've never been, but I'd love to. I'd love to go to all of those countries you listed.
Yeah, we'll put it on our bucket list. U.S. political reporter and foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, thanks for joining me from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.